All right, let's check in now with, check in with our kind of minds and how we're doing sort of mentally in lockdown 2. And in terms of the comparison with lockdown 1, we all went into the unknown, didn't we? But this time we know what we're dealing with. And it's winter as well, isn't it? That makes us feel a little bit more restricted. And typically, you know, winter's not great for being mood enhancing. We miss the sun. So we've got a bit of deja vu. We're talking about food and cooking again. I'm sure there's some banana bread making going on, and probably a lot of people wondering which hobby to take up next. I've got Philp Cox-Hynd who's joined me. He's author of Mindfulness and the Art of Change by Choice. He is a very clever chap indeed. He's a behavioural change expert, and has a list of clients who he helps and who he consults with sort of various issues. Philp, welcome to Times Radio. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to be with you, Kate.
So lockdown 2, a little bit different from the first, and we're going into winter. Do you think people are struggling more this time round because of that, or are we generally a little bit better than the first time round because we know what we're dealing with?
I think it's probably a mixture. I think on the one hand, we kind of have an idea of what's going on because we've been through lockdown 1, but every situation is different. And I think you just mentioned the weather. I think shorter nights, going around again, COVID fatigue. I think people are getting tired of being out of control. So I think it's probably more challenging in some ways than the newness of lockdown first time around.
Economic problems as well for some people. We're having to try and save and try and be quite frugal with our money. A lot of us, you know, a lot of people are out of work as a result of lockdown 1. So that can't be helping. How do you? I mean, there must be a little bit, and when we talk about mindfulness and just, you know, probably accepting where we are and trying not to get too anxious and trying not to get too panicky about it. But that's really easy for me to say, basically, isn't it?
It is, and I think that the idea of mindfulness is to stay in the present. But I think from a human point of view, that's so hard. We have these incredible things called minds, and we think about the past and we make sense of the present, often based on the past and looking to the future. And we spend so much of our time thinking. We have between, I think, 20 and 80,000 thoughts a day.
Wow.
Which is incredible.
It is.
And research has shown that every time we have a thought, the brain shoots a tiny little bit of adrenaline, you know, the fight or flight chemical around the body. Every single thought. And if you sit still for 5 minutes and notice your breathing and just do a kind of simple meditation that a lot of people have become aware of with calm and mindfulness exercises, etc., you can start to feel what's going on in your body when you have a thought. And I think one of the most important things when people are facing fear of loss of job, worry about money, all of the things that actually at the moment we can't control. And then I think one of the things we can do is to sit back on our own resources of being able to check in with our bodies. What is our bodies telling us?
Yeah.
And how do we feel? And it's not just a matter of feeling something and then pretending it's not there. I think often it's giving ourselves the courage to feel frightened, to allow ourselves sometimes not always to have the answers. And I think that's a difficult one for a lot of people to accept. But I think unless we can accept the truth of what's going on, it's very, very difficult to move forward. I was listening to the interview just before the news with Terry. It was extraordinary to listen to. And she amplified for me the power of telling the truth.
Yeah, facing up to it. Yeah.
And not just the physical truth, but the emotional truth.
Yes.
And I think that's often something we bulk away from on a moment-by-moment, day-by-day basis.
It's hard to do that, Philp, isn't it? When we are stuck at home, when we're isolated, when we can only meet up with one person,
Yes.
you know, we can't drink either, and sometimes it takes a couple of drinks just for us to be completely honest. It's difficult to be honest over a Zoom call, for example. How do we give people permission to try and be brave, but frame that with the restrictions that we're all subject to?
I think a lot of it is to do with having courage to break the ice of saying, what's really going on. I think being honest is a balancing point. There's a balance between being, on the one hand, totally authentic. I mean, if we completely let our emotions rip on a Zoom call or a business call, then it may not be appropriate. So it is getting a balance between being real, being authentic, and being appropriate. But I think often our minds, the kind of survival part of our brain, the part that doesn't want to show up as being weak, will overcompensate and not necessarily say what's going on. So I think if we can take the courage on a call to ask questions. I've just been doing a Zoom workshop to Toronto a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
And the organisation that wanted me to do it, it was on emotional resilience, and I did it live in Brussels. I was going to do it in various other European cities before lockdown, and then, of course, they're all cancelled. So they wanted me to do this workshop on Zoom to Toronto. And they said, could you replicate the exact same workshop? And it was 7 hours. And they said, of course, you couldn't do 7 hours on Zoom.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I think I could. And they said, well, how? I said, well, get people talking. And that's what we did. We structured it. We had coffee breaks morning and afternoon and a proper lunch break. But the key, right at the beginning, it was setting the context. And I'm a big one for context. I started off by talking to the people on Zoom. Could you please keep your video on? Because some people think that it's a bit like television. You can turn it on or off. Keep your audio on as well. And how are you right now? What's going on for you at the moment? And without probing too much, and also self-disclosing myself, I disclosed that I hadn't done a workshop via Zoom to Toronto before, and I was feeling nervous. And they went, but you've done this for years. And I said, yeah, but I still feel nervous. And if I can't feel alive, if I can't feel some fear or some nerves, I'll be amazed if every time that you take to the radio, you don't feel adrenaline. Now, you might not describe it as nerves, but you'll feel alive.
Yeah, well, it is what keeps me up until 10 to 1 in the morning often.
Absolutely. So I think the little things like being able to self-disclose with people, be it on a Zoom call or with friends, asking questions and really listen, draw them out. Being a good listener will often allow people to fill the space. I think we can often be very quick to come in with solutions.
Yeah. How do we... So if we, and I'm going to relate this back to people listening who might have a Zoom call with their friends or with their family or with their work. And you might say, first of all, how are you? And they might say, yeah, fine. What's the next question that you should go in with to get them to open up a little bit more, to not just get them to brush that question aside? How can we give them permission? What can we say to give them permission to feel like it's a safe space for them to really tell us how they feel?
I think I'd start off with a little bit of self-disclosure from me. Okay. It's interesting. I had a FaceTime call with two friends of mine in California last night, and we've all been facilitators for years, and we've run workshops where people have been crying and laughing and all the rest of it, and we spent the first minute talking about the weather. And I pointed this out, and I said, I'm feeling really uncomfortable that we haven't spoken for a year, and even we are talking about the weather. Yeah. I want to tell you something about what I've been going through yesterday. And I told them a little bit about something in my life. I'm just getting over a bad chest infection at the moment, and I was frightened. I was frightened with a chest infection to go into crowds because every time I coughed, people looked at me as though I've got COVID.
Yeah, and having a chest infection during a COVID pandemic is not a fun place to be.
So just by disclosing something that was emotionally relevant to me, it immediately changed the mood. And then they asked some questions about me. And then after answering some of those, I could then ask them questions about, so how are you? I mean, how are you? Really, how do you feel? How have you been? What's been going on in your life? So I think a little bit of self-disclosure about what's going on the inside rather than just the fluff of the outside. It sets the context, and it allows those you're talking to probably to ask questions themselves and then feel safe enough to self-disclose. from their own point of view.
We'll round up. We've got about a minute left. We'll round up
Sure.
with those people like me who think all the time, and you've told me what happens to us when we think all the time. And I'm the kind of person that's the worst advocate, but probably the best advocate, or should be, for a meditation. And we're talking about it more, and we should appreciate that a meditation is a step away from keeping our brains busy, and it might be good for us physically and mentally too.
Yes.
We've got 30 seconds. Give us a couple of tips for a quick 5-minute meditation. How do we get into it? What is
Very
it?
simple.
Very simply.
Sit comfortably. You can do it with me now.
Oh, gosh,
Sit comfortably.
I may not finish the final 5 minutes of the show, everyone.
Feet flat on the floor, arms uncrossed, legs uncrossed if possible. Close your eyes, take a deep breath in. And as you breathe out, just let your breathing naturally settle into its natural rhythm, whatever that is. And just notice the breath as it comes in and out of your nostrils, and as it hits your top lip. And it may be that you just quickly scan your body. Any tension in your neck, your arms, perhaps where do your arms touch the tops of your legs, feel your backside on the chair, just notice your body in the chair. And when you've done that quickly, that may take a minute, to bring your attention back to your breathing. And for 3 or 4 minutes, just notice, you can set a timer in advance, the breath as it comes in and out of your nose. Is it hot? Is it cold? Just see if you can notice micro sensations just on breathing. And it's only focusing on breathing because it's a constant. That's why sages for thousands of years have used it.
Okay. And
that
just
will
carry on
slowly
with that.
start within a minute of doing that.
Yeah.
Your heart rate will
try and
slowly
wind
start
down.
to calm down. Your breathing will probably settle.
Well, we've had, I don't know how much you cost in real life, but I feel like our listeners have had a little free session with you there. And as you go to sleep, listeners, this evening, maybe you could give that a go. Philp Cox-Hynd, behavioural change expert, facilitator as well. Thanks for joining us on Times Radio. It's been great to speak to you.
Great to speak to you too.